Children, today we are going to continue our series on the Ten Commandments. And today we're going to be thinking about the sixth commandment. Can anyone tell me what the sixth commandment is? It is... Oh, wait a minute. It is the commandment to not commit adultery. Now, who can tell me what adultery is? Adultery is unfaithfulness in marriage. Now, the Lord, He designed the marriage of husband and wife to be something that can last forever. Not something that just lasts here on earth, but to eternity. And because there is marriage in heaven, it is indeed something that can last to eternity. And the Lord promises that these marriages have the greatest potential for the greatest happiness. But there is the looming danger of adultery. Adultery does not like marriage. Adultery seeks to ruin marriage, and with it make many people very unhappy. The Lord, of course, does not want this. The Lord does not want adultery to happen. And that's why the Lord gave the commandment to not commit adultery. He gave us that commandment to protect marriage. Now, children, you are not married right now, so you might think that this commandment does not apply to you. But it does. It applies to everyone. Because there are things that you can do right now to prepare for a long-lasting marriage. And it has to do with observing this commandment. So today we're going to read a story about two different characters. And let's pay attention to what these two characters do. And what they do will show us what we should and should not do in order to prepare for marriage. So this is the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife in Egypt. Now, if we remember, Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt, and he was bought by a man named Potiphar. And Potiphar realizes that there's something very special about Joseph. Joseph has the Lord with him, and Potiphar, he realizes this. He notices this. So he makes Joseph the overseer of all the things in his house. So that is where our story picks up today. Thus Potiphar left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused, and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And so it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand, and fled and ran outside. And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "She has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. And so it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was, when his master heard these words, which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Amen. So in the story we read about two very different characters. We have Joseph on the one hand, and we have Potiphar's on the other. So in the story, Potiphar's wife, she sees Joseph and wants to be with him. But what does Joseph do? What's the first thing that he does when Potiphar's wife comes to him? He refuses. Now, did anyone catch the reason why Joseph refused to be with Potiphar's wife? Joseph refused because Potiphar's wife, she was married, and Joseph wanted to protect her marriage by not harming it. He saw that to harm her marriage was a sin against God. But Potiphar's wife, she did not seem to care for her own marriage. She just wanted to be with Joseph. Now, in the story, Joseph is the character that we want to be. His actions depict exactly what we can do when we are confronted with the choice to do evil. At first, he refuses, and then refuses a number of other times. But then he flees away from the danger. Joseph running away from Potiphar's wife is a lot like shunning evil because it is a sin against God. In this case, he was fleeing from adultery. He was fleeing from everything that hurts marriage. And he was simply obeying the Lord's commandment to not commit adultery. So we, of course, can do the same thing in our lives. We can flee from all sorts of harmful things. And what's absolutely wonderful to think about is how the Lord helps us when we do run away from evil. Every time we act like Joseph and run away from harmful and evil things, the Lord gives us a love of the opposite good. So, for instance, every time we shun the tendency to be hateful and mean, which is a form of murder, the Lord gives us a stronger love for our neighbor. Every time we shun the desire to steal something from a store, the Lord, he gives us a love of sincerity. And in the case of adultery, every time we shun the harmful love of adultery, the Lord gives us a love for marriage. So we can think about Joseph again. Every time he refused to be with Potiphar's wife, the Lord was further strengthening his love for marriage. So that's what we can do to prepare ourselves for marriage. We can follow the Lord's commandment to not commit adultery. And when we do that, the Lord will give us a love of the opposite good, a love for marriage. Now, there is the other character, Potiphar's wife. And Potiphar's wife is the direct opposite of Joseph. She further and further entrenched herself in evil desire. She was happy to commit adultery with Joseph, but she was also happy to covet Joseph, or to want him even though she wasn't allowed to have him. And she was also happy to lie about what really happened. She blamed Joseph for trying to commit adultery when it was really her. We do not want to be like Potiphar's wife. Now, what's interesting to consider in the end of the story is that Joseph is thrown into prison. Now, why would someone who does all the right things end up in prison? That doesn't seem to make any sense. But we can think of it like this. Sometimes it's difficult to do the right thing. Maybe it's tempting to be like Potiphar's wife. So doing the right thing isn't always easy. It can sometimes be very challenging. But let's remember, when Joseph was in the prison, he had success because the Lord was with him. So we can remember that the Lord, he's always with us when we do the right thing, even if it's hard to do. He's still working to provide us with all the necessary loves that we need to be a good and heavenly person. And in this case, when we shun that love of adultery, he can prepare us more and more for a happy marriage in heaven forever. Amen.